Here's our top troubleshooting tips for your FX2 canister filter. There's nothing worse than investing in an expensive, high-quality piece of equipment for your aquarium, like a Fluval FX2 canister filter, only for it to end up not working the way you expected it to. Now, fortunately, many of the most common issues that you may encounter with an FX2 are solved with some really basic troubleshooting. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the most commonly reported issues and give you the steps that you can take to solve them and to make sure that your FX2 is actually working the way it's supposed to. Now, we've previously uploaded a video all about maintaining an FX2 filter, and a lot of what I will be talking about today was covered and demonstrated in that video. So I definitely recommend checking it out as well. I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. If the flow of your filter is slower than you'd expect, there's a few different things you can check. First of all, make sure there's no excess hosing. The hosing should follow a relatively straight path from the canister to the aquarium with no kinks or loops or like huge amounts of excess hosing. You want the hosing to be installed in such a way that you can easily access the filter and like remove it from its spot when you need to maintain it, but not too much more than that. If there's a whole lot of extra hosing, it'll definitely contribute to the flow being slower than it's supposed to, and that can actually increase the overall noise level of the filter as well. Next, you want to check that the intake strainer isn't clogged with anything. Obviously, if there's like plant leaves or other things kind of blocking where the water is supposed to actually enter the filter, the overall flow is going to be reduced. Now, the FX intake strainer is actually designed to help prevent this from happening. That's why it's so large and why there's kind of like two layers to it almost, but it still can happen. So just keep an eye on the intake strainer and make sure that there's no debris. And if there is, just try to get it out of there so that the filter can pull in water as efficiently as it needs to. Lastly, media maintenance. So as filter media, traps debris and does its job, it becomes dirty. And if it's left for too long, it can become too dirty to the point where it's basically clogged. And at that point, water can't flow through it properly anymore, and it kind of has to go around. That obviously will significantly reduce the overall flow coming out of the filter, and it can put a lot of pressure on the filter's pump as well. Now, I think one way that this issue can arise, as you add more fish to your aquarium over time, or just as your fish grow over time, the amount of waste that's going to be produced is going to increase. And so your media maintenance frequency may need to increase correspondingly as well. So we recommend starting with the recommended frequency that's outlined in your instruction manual, but when you do open up your filter and start to clean it out, if the media looks really dirty, almost to the point of being clogged, you may want to clean it more frequently, just so that the filter can operate as efficiently as it's supposed to. If your FX2 is making a rumbling noise, or if there's so much vibration that you can really hear it, there's really only one place that noise can be coming from: the impeller. The impeller is the only moving part in the entire filter. It just sits there and spins 24/7. So any debris that accumulates on the impeller, even if it's tiny little pieces, or just as the impeller wears down over time from just spinning constantly, that can and probably will lead to it making noise, which will make the whole filter sound like it's making noise. Now, it's super easy to address this issue. Every 3 months or so, open up the motor, take out the impeller, clean it out really thoroughly, clean out inside the well, clean out the whole impeller assembly. And then on about a yearly basis, it's a good idea to replace the impeller just so that it keeps working as efficiently as possible and as quietly as possible. As I mentioned earlier, excess hosing can also contribute to the overall noise level of the filter. So try to make sure you've got as much as you need and not much more, and that'll help keep noise levels to a minimum. If your FX2 seems to be like spitting out air bubbles into the aquarium, there's a few different things to check. First of all, filter media, again. Imagine you've got a fine filter pad like Fluval Quick Clear, for example, and it's become completely clogged. Any air that enters the filter, which can happen normally, it'll get to this blockage and kind of get trapped underneath it. And then as it accumulates, little amounts of air will escape and be shot back out into the aquarium. So just, again, make sure your filter media is cleaned and replaced as frequently as it needs to be, and this won't be an issue. Next, check that the filter intake isn't positioned anywhere near an air stone or any other source of air in the aquarium. It's a good idea to kind of just keep them on opposite sides from each other, put the air stone on one side and the intake all the way on the other, just to make sure there's no possibility of the air from the air stone being drawn into the filter, which obviously then it'll accumulate and be discharged back into the tank. You'll want to make sure that the rubber connector that joins the intake assembly and the intake hosing hasn't hardened and dried out. It's made of rubber, right? So anything made of rubber can sort of stiffen and dry out over time. And if that's happened with your filter installation, air can enter through that joint because it won't be perfectly airtight anymore, and then it'll be drawn into the filter and you'll start seeing air being spat out. Now to solve this problem, it's super simple. You can either just replace that rubber connector when you do notice it's starting to dry out, or just make sure that the joint between the intake assembly and the hosing is below the water level. Because then even if the rubber does kind of like stiffen, there's no way air can get into it, so you won't have any problems. If you have a saltwater tank and you use a protein skimmer, you want to make sure there's a very effective bubble trap on the skimmer output. Otherwise, the filter over time will accumulate this super fine mist of bubbles that you can't really see too much, and it'll eventually, release it in a much more noticeable way. Lastly, you want to make sure that all of the gaskets and all of the O-rings of the filter have been cleaned and lubricated with Fluval silicone lubricant, item number A325, and that the ribbed hosing, again, doesn't have any kinks or loops or bends. Both of these things can cause air to either enter or accumulate inside of the filter, so making sure everything is installed and maintained the way it should be will help prevent all of that from happening. Now on the subject of lubrication, if your FX2 is leaking, it's almost certainly because there's a gasket or an O-ring somewhere that has dried out and needs to be lubricated or replaced. We recommend maintaining the O-rings kind of the same frequency as the impeller. So every 3 months, check them, clean them. You can just use like a warm soft cloth to kind of wipe them down, and then apply Fluval silicone lubricant. And then on a yearly basis, it's a good idea to replace them just to make sure they haven't lost any of their integrity and they're able to work as you want them to. Now, in a very important point, never use Vaseline to lubricate any gaskets or O-rings. Vaseline will actually dry out the rubber a lot more rapidly and cause the O-rings to fail prematurely. Fluval silicone lubricant, item number A325, will be your best friend. Lastly, it's very important to make sure that the O-rings are actually positioned in the right spot. It happens quite frequently that, someone's filter will be leaking, and once we kind of dive into it, it's because the O-ring's not where it should be, and so obviously it's leaking. So just refer to your instruction manual to make sure that the O-rings are actually positioned, in their correct grooves, and if they are, then you shouldn't have any issues. And that is it for today. Be sure to hit the link in the description down below to learn more about the FX2 canister filter. If you have any questions, concerns, or conundrums, please leave them in the comment section. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you enjoyed the video, hit like, and if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.